Hey everyone, I'm Danielle Byington, and in this video, I'm going to be talking about ways we have looked at ourselves over time. Now, I know that that could mean a, a lot of different things, but I am going to be focusing on specifically four different ways, and none of them include mirrors. There is quite a plethora of research in anthropology, especially about how we have interacted with ourselves regarding mirrors and seeing our reflection, or even just seeing our reflection and say like a pool of water, for prehistoric man. You would want to look at those resources for if you're looking for something more along those lines. I am looking at things that are more like extensions or devices or modalities in which we have looked at ourselves. Now, I normally would use this as kind of a teaching tool, as sort of like a little micro presentation in classes where I might be teaching Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, or where I might be teaching T.S. Eliot's The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, or even The Wasteland. So, kind of think along the lines of that headspace of what I'm trying to accomplish here. So let's say I'm working with a timeline here, and that hypothetically, one of the first ways we look at ourselves would have been in cave dwellings. Okay, this is prehistory. So with prehistoric man, some of our first evidence of humankind reflecting on its existence is the presence of cave art. So much cave art exists around the world, some of it older than others. We're talking of as far back as like 20 and 30,000 BCE. And while some of it does illustrate the reality of that culture, that landscape around that particular tribe or group, settlement, whatever it might be, prehistoric people, uh, it reflects what was around them, the type of animal life, bodies of water, and so forth. One thing that's often prevalent is the handprints or things that either a handprint or a tracing of it, or one of the most famous types is the red ochre powder that was blown over top of a hand pressed hands rather pressed on the cave wall, so it leaves an outline of where the hand had been on the wall. That is that first sort of recognition of I am here. Children do this sort of thing even now. If you leave them with markers and crayons and whatnot, drawing and tracing the hand is just kind of this innate thing that besides drawing things around them, like stick figures for their representing their family or a car or some kind of box and triangle representing a house, representing the self often comes first. Okay, the one of the next prominent ways that we were looking at ourselves happened with art. Now we have paintings, not necessarily self portraits, because not everyone was an artist, but we are able to glimpse into history and look at portraits of historical figures or people who weren't even necessarily, history goes to the victors, people who are not, who are lesser known, and we can tell by what they're wearing, things about their social status, what they are, how they are positioned in the portrait, and so on. Now, this is unique to, or its beginnings rather, are unique to the early modern period. might think of that as something roughly like uh, about the 1500s through about the 1800s in Western civilization. So, like, I'm talking in a sense of the Western world in Europe, because paintings predominantly in Europe in the Middle Ages were very strictly centered on religious iconography. So depictions of biblical scenes, lots of imagery of the Virgin Mary holding an infant Jesus, things like that were prevalent. So you didn't really have secular art per se depicting people that was, more widespread. So that's one way we might look at ourselves. And if you think about it, it's not always as accurate as maybe we might imagine it to be, because if you were a painter and you were being paid handsomely by your sitter, who, by the way, most all of these people who would be painted are going to be people who are wealthy and probably white, more than likely. So you have a lot about only a certain type of social class being depicted at this time. Only they can look at themselves in that portrait. You're if you are being paid well to do this by some rich person and they are ugly, you're not going to paint them as ugly as they actually are. Um, you would probably give them a more defined jawline, or if they had survived smallpox, you're probably not going to paint their pox scars on their face. You also had movements through different art schools at the time of like the shape and design of the eyes and the eyebrows. And you can kind of see that when you look through art history of the way people were being painted, how their faces look. So a rounder eyebrows and such, as opposed to more natural looking ones. Or a lot of people have a straighter line, a little bit of an arch. Normally, people don't have that kind of like cartoon round eyebrows. So we were looking at ourselves that way in the early modern period, and then things changed dramatically. Now, let me say something about these dates that I'm putting here. These are approximations, these are tentative. There are different views from different philosophers if we're talking about the changing of society and what defines being modern or early modern and so forth. So, here, one argument is that we might say the modern period begins roughly in the mid 1800s, once we have the commonality of the use of photography, the camera. Now, think of the cliches that you know about the camera. The camera doesn't lie. An expression such as that. It's not like the painter who can coddle the ego of the sitter for the painted portraits in the early modern period. Um, Someone who has their photograph taken is going to show all the little hairs, all the grit, the scars, the texture. To a degree, we don't have high definition cameras at this point, but you're seeing a lot more detail, and it's not all very pretty. So, another thing about this is that this is not just exclusive to the wealthy anymore. Um, Moving on, I'm not going to say that it was necessarily widespread among families who were poorer, but they might set aside a lot of money to have one large family portrait captured by the camera at some point, whereas the wealthy might be having it done pretty often. So now we can look at ourselves, and there there's a greater accessibility to look at who we are, and then we have to look at and come to terms with those ugly parts of ourselves and decide how we're going to feel about that and move on and not be defined by that, maybe. Okay. Next, a lot of scholarship roughly says this next period begins in 1945, which you may associate with the end of World War II. And that's when we have like a resuscitation of the West. So we're not um, being beat to death by World War I, or also and I mean in terms economically and socially, all the things that were going on in World War II, and so this is called postmodern. And one of the most significant aspects of what it is to me, what something means to be postmodern, is that we are taking that all that ugly stuff that was like say in that the capture excuse me that the camera captured, and we're rewriting the narrative about it a little bit. So you have this in studies of historicism. So historiography is about how we are telling the story of historical events. I just mentioned that phrase a moment ago, history goes to the victors. What about all the other players involved in these events happening? Things like new historicism want to look at the other people, the marginalized people left out of the story. This can involve things like gender, race, religion, the people who like didn't get to be in the spotlight because society didn't want them or allow them to be in the spotlight. Now, once we are progressing past 1945, we're moving into a period where the way we might look at ourselves now, didn't mean to make this look today by being so wide, but should be a little more boxy. Television. So throughout the decade of the 1950s is when we have the prevalence of the majority of homes owning a television set. One of the things that really bolstered the sell of television was, well, people wanted to watch their programs, but what helped the money, where the money came from for funding these programs and all these film studios making these productions, was from marketing and advertising. So all the commercials are distributed in between each block of the show that one is watching. They want to sell you something. And it's not just that they want to sell you the product. Successful marketing and advertising is showing you how your life can be improved by possessing that product. So we have kind of a double whammy going on with how we look at ourselves when it comes to the television set and the postmodern. So there are commercials, there is advertisement going on that is showing us how we could be a different kind of person, a better kind of person, even if we have that product, if we use that specific product. Then there are also the narratives, the stories, and the television shows and such that are being shown on the television programs at that time, where people might find inspiration in a character they're watching. And so, or even if it's more like, they don't have talk shows yet, but like when you move on into the 60s and you have the types of shows with musicians coming on and performing, to have a variation of like, you're not watching yourself on television, but you are seeing a sort of cultural icon on television, be it that television show's character or that celebrity, that musician, whoever it might be. And you want to take a part of that and be some version of that, taking some facet of that and making it a part of yourself, which you might say, well, I don't do that. You do. Everyone does, or it wouldn't be as successful as it has been for the past few decades. So the question here is, what comes next? What is the next way that we look at ourselves? Right now, the easy target might be our smartphones. So it's not just that it's the device, though, it's what you're accessing through it. So maybe we might pinpoint this as information or misinformation or social media, and how we can present ourselves a certain type of narrative of ourselves on that. Okay, so that's all for this collective of different ways we've looked at ourselves over time. Thank you for watching.